Today, I'm going to analyze one of the most well-known legal and ethical business failures in modern history, the rise and fall of Theranos. This case offers powerful lessons about ethics, corporate governance, and the limits of Silicon Valley's fake-it-till-you-make-it culture, and the importance of transparency, especially in industries that affect human lives. My goal is to explain what happened, outline the key legal and ethical issues, evaluate the organization's response, and discuss what businesses can learn from Theranos to prevent similar failures in the future. Theranos was founded in 2003 by Elizabeth Holmes, who claimed she had developed a groundbreaking technology capable of running hundreds of blood tests with just a finger prick. This promise attracted massive amounts of attention. Holmes secured high-profile board members, including former U.S. Secretaries of State Henry Kissinger and George Shultz, and raised hundreds of millions of dollars from powerful venture capitalists. At its peak, Theranos was valued at over $9 billion, and Holmes was celebrated as the next Steve Jobs. But behind the scenes, the technology didn't work. Investigative reporting by the Wall Street Journal's John Carreyrou revealed that Theranos was using traditional laboratory equipment like Siemens analyzers rather than their own devices, despite claiming otherwise. Instead of fixing the technology's failures, the company misrepresented its capabilities to investors, partners, and even patients. The collapse of Theranos revolves around three major sets of issues: securities fraud, harm to patients, and the suppression of whistleblowers. Each represents a failure of law, ethics, and organizational values. Legally, Theranos' conduct meets the classical elements of fraud: material misrepresentation, knowledge of falsity, intent to induce reliance, justifiable reliance, and damages, all of which appeared in interactions with both investors and patients. The company's actions also violated consumer protection principles that prohibit deceptive business practices and false advertising. This also highlights a major corporate governance failure because Theranos' board lacked the scientific competence required to fulfill its duty of care, which requires directors to make informed, expert-driven decisions. First, Theranos engaged in securities fraud. Holmes and COO Sunny Balwani made materially false statements about what their technology could do and about the company's financial health. They exaggerated military partnerships, hid technological failures, and misled investors, which are all actions that directly violated U.S. securities laws. Their conduct also violated the duty of loyalty and candor owed to investors, which requires leaders to provide truthful, complete information when soliciting capital. In 2022, Holmes was convicted on 4 federal counts of fraud and conspiracy for deceiving investors, and Balwani received a similar conviction. These findings were later upheld in the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals in 2025, which affirmed the fraud convictions and the substantial restitution order, reinforcing the seriousness of the legal violations. Second, the company violated key medical ethics principles. Patients received inaccurate test results. Some were incorrectly told they were HIV positive or had miscarried, while others were given false thyroid, pregnancy, and cholesterol results. Using unvalidated medical technology on real patients is a serious breach of medical ethics, particularly the principle of non-maleficence, meaning do no harm. Theranos also violated informed consent, since the patients were never told that the technology was experimental. Beyond the non-maleficence, Theranos also violated the principle of beneficence, or acting in the patient's best interest, and justice, or ensuring fair and equitable treatment, which are both foundational in biomedical ethics. These ethical failures were amplified when tests were offered in more than 40 Walgreens wellness centers in Arizona, exposing hundreds of thousands of patients to unreliable testing before the partnership was eventually shut down. Third, Theranos created a culture of secrecy and intimidation. Employees who raised concerns were threatened with lawsuits or terminated. Whistleblowers, including Tyler Schultz, George Schultz's grandson, were key in exposing the truth, but faced aggressive legal pressure. This reflects a breakdown in organizational integrity and a deliberate attempt to hide misconduct. Their actions also contradict the intent of federal whistleblower protection laws, such as the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, which require companies to protect employees who report wrongdoing in good faith. So, how did Theranos respond when faced with these challenges? Instead of course correcting, the company denied the wrongdoing for years. They continued raising money and expanding operations, even as the technology continued to produce unreliable results. Theranos also misled major partners, including Walgreens, which later paid more than $30 million to settle claims that it had been deceived about the reliability of Theranos' testing technology. From a crisis management perspective, Theranos ignored best practices that call for early disclosure, stakeholder engagement, and corrective action, instead choosing concealment, which increased legal and reputational risk. Ultimately, the company shut down only after media scrutiny, regulatory intervention, and whistleblower pressure. The response strategy relied on secrecy, legal intimidation, and image management, not ethics, transparency, or accountability. So what exactly failed inside the organization? First, Theranos lacked independent oversight. Their board was filled with high-profile individuals who had prestige, but little medical or scientific expertise. Second, the organizational culture valued charisma over competence. Team members were discouraged from asking questions, data was compartmentalized, and the company pushed unrealistic timelines that forced its scientists into impossible situations. Finally, investors did not conduct adequate due diligence, trusting Holmes's vision more than the actual evidence. The board's failures to challenge Holmes also reflect a violation of the duty of oversight, which requires directors to monitor corporate risk and ensure compliance systems are functioning, a principle emphasized in the Stone v. Ritter case of 2006. This case illustrates how law, ethics, and values intersect in organizations. Legally, Theranos violated security regulations, FDA rules, and consumer protection laws. Ethically, they failed in honesty, patient safety, transparency, and accountability. At the value level, the company prioritized hype, image, and speed over integrity and scientific rigor. The fake it till you make it mindset may be common in Silicon Valley, but in healthcare where real people can be harmed, it's unsafe and unethical. Despite the damage, this case taught important lessons. Whistleblowers and investigative journalists played an essential role in revealing the truth, showing how external accountability can correct internal failures. Regulatory bodies such as the SEC and FDA also reinforced their role in monitoring health-related innovations. Lastly, the case led to more scrutiny of biotech startups and investor practices, increasing awareness of the need for stronger governance structures. On the negative side, Theranos exposed how easily investors, board members, and even regulators can be misled. Charisma and a compelling narrative overshadowed scientific facts. Weak governance and a lack of oversight created an environment where deception could thrive for years. The company operated in secrecy, avoiding peer review, and rejected external validation, both behaviors that enabled the fraud to continue unchallenged. The culture of secrecy prevented employees from raising concerns. This culture also violated basic principles of organizational behavior, including psychological safety, or the idea that employees should feel safe to speak up without the fear of retaliation. What could Theranos have done differently? First, they could have openly shared the limitations of their technology instead of exaggerating capabilities. This might have allowed them to develop partnerships and pursue long-term R&D without deception. Second, they should have never used unproven technology on patients. R&D should have remained separate from clinical services. Third, the company needed a culture that encouraged feedback, protected whistleblowers, and welcomed audits. Finally, compliance with FDA regulations and clinical standards should have been prioritized, not avoided. Had Theranos used a formal ethical decision-making model, such as a utilitarian analysis, they could have considered the consequences of their actions and avoided harm. Using this type of ethical framework could have guided the organization towards a more transparent, responsible, and patient-centered choices, ultimately preventing much of the damage that occurred. The law eventually caught up with Theranos, but only after significant damage had been done. This raises an important question. Are current legal protections enough? In many ways, no. There is a need for stronger oversight of health technology companies and more rigorous due diligence requirements for investors in highly regulated fields. Clinical innovations should require mandatory validation before they are deployed on patients, and companies operating in healthcare must be held to higher standards because the consequences of failure are much more severe. In conclusion, the Theranos case is a powerful reminder of what can happen when ambition overshadows ethics and when charisma replaces accountability. It demonstrates the importance of robust governance, regulatory controls, and a culture grounded in integrity, especially in industries that directly affect public health. These lessons not only apply to biotech, but also to AI, pharmaceuticals, transportation, and any sector where safety is critical. When organizations build accountability into their culture and prioritize ethical values, they protect not only their stakeholders, but also the public. This analysis builds on the work of investigative journalists, regulatory agencies, and authors like John Carreyrou, as well as publicly available reports by the SEC, FDA, DOJ, and major news outlets such as CNN, the BBC, and the Wall Street Journal.